the state of Arizona. Biden was able to win Arizona, also he portrayed himself as more of a moderate to win the state, and I think that was a beneficial factor, and I think Pete Buttigieg will be able to win the state as well. The state did go to Trump by a lean margin in 2024, but we've seen quite a few demographic groups shift away from Trump and Republicans in general since 2024. We've seen it in the special elections that have occurred since the presidential election in 2024. And I think that Democrats, I think Arizona will probably be closer than Nevada, but Democrats, I would say, should be optimistic if Pete Buttigieg were to be the candidate of choice. And then we'll go to the other half of the Sun Belt. I'm going to put Georgia into the tilt blue range. This state also went to Biden in 2020. If I remember correctly, it was the closest state, and also shortly thereafter voted for 2 Democratic senators, which really resulted in the Senate flipping to the Democrats for that period. And then later on this November, Jon Ossoff, the Democrat in the Senate, one of the Democrats in the Senate, is running for re-election. He's the incumbent, and I think that he's at the moment favored, and I think that if that election goes well for Democrats, they should be optimistic that the election on the presidency in 2028 will also end up blue for the state of Georgia. And then as far as North Carolina goes, I think I'm going to put that into the tilt red rating. I did not mean to do that to West Virginia. Anyhow, but North Carolina, I'm going to put that into J.D. Vance's column. This state has had a pretty consistent history of voting Republican, especially on the presidential level. The state has elected Democrats in the past, such as for the governor's seat. And then also this November, it's looking like Democrats are favored to win the Senate seat. One of those former Democratic governors, Roy Cooper, is running for the Senate and is the Democratic Party's nominee. He was a great pick for Democrats, and I think that he would do well for the Senate election. However, I think the presidential will be a different ballgame. There's just quite a few voters who only vote during the presidential elections, and generally that favors whatever the partisan lean of that state generally is. And so that is going to be North Carolina for J.D. Vance, bringing us to 259 to 235. And then the state I feel the most confident in calling is probably going to be Michigan. If I remember correctly, Pete Buttigieg now resides in Michigan. He was floated as a potential Senate nominee. In this case, he's hypothetical presidential nominee. But Michigan, that is going to bring Pete Buttigieg over the edge, pun intended, and then that is going to get him to 274. Another state that I feel like would most likely end up in the Democratic Party's column would be Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin is probably going to be the second or maybe third state most likely to flip back to the Democrats if the election were to be held today, as far as states that were lost by the Democrats in 2024, which, to be fair, was all of them except for the congressional district in Nebraska. But that is going to be 284, and then generally the Rust Belt votes together. I do think Pennsylvania is probably J.D. Vance's best hope at winning a swing state. So we can, if we give it to him, it would be 254. It would still result in a Pete Buttigieg victory. I think it would be close, but I think in this case the Rust Belt is probably going to vote all together. That's been the general consensus in case the 3 Rust Belt states voted together. In 2016, they all went for Trump. 2020, all went for Biden. 2024, all went to Trump again. And I think if the election were to be held today between these 2 candidates, that the 3 would go to the Democrat Pete Buttigieg. So that leaves us with 303 to 2.